Now, in the last session, we were seeing about multi-modules and how do you break a project into different components or modules and how do you set it up. And in case of dependencies, how do you set dependencies in Maven? And through the multi-modules, how you can solve the dependencies. Now, to continue with this, let's do a deployment automation. So many times when we say deployment, there could be different types of deployment. So one among them is if your application that you're trying to run is a web application, then certain times it has to be deployed to some web server so that once the build has been completed and it has been tested, we would have to deploy it to application server, whichever is running. So in that case, now, once again, for when you say deployment, you need some application server or a web server to be running. So how do you connect to that? So anything that we have to do outside our default lifecycle, we need to tell a particular plugin. So that is when, depending on what kind of web server that you're using for your deployment, we need to give the details of the plugin with respect to that tool or server, whatever that we are connecting. Okay, so in the same way, now for the demo purpose, I have installed a JBoss web server in my machine. And for JBoss, then we have a specific plugin. Okay, so if you see, so this is the JBoss plugin through which from the Maven you can connect to the particular JBoss application server. So you can see that this is the JBoss application server right now I have, and this is an empty instance, which means it doesn't have anything other than the application server that I've installed. Okay, so basically when you deploy something like a jar or var, all those things will be available in this particular deployments in the server. So if you go to it, now you get the default page. And again, if you want to know what is the GAV of this plugin, then go to the usage page and you will get the details about how do we get and what and all instructions that we have to use. Okay, so just to cut short, now I've already written everything. So let's take this and put it up in our project. So this is a project. So let's take component 2, for example. So now I don't have a build tag. So let me put it up inside it. Now as you see that the tag of a plugin begins with build, because since we do not have anything else, or I had deleted the previous plugins what we had given for the ant run and the Maven execute plugin, right? So those two things are not there. That's the reason we are trying to put it once again from the build plugins plugin, and in that we are giving the value of GAV of that particular plugin, that is JBoss Maven plugin. And then in that I'm giving only the configuration value. Okay, so in the configuration value, what and all is needed, since here this plugin is going to help us to connect to JBoss application server, and in that case there are certain specific values like JBoss home. So JBoss home refers where is the application server running. So currently it is running in my machine, and this is the directory where I have installed this in my machine. So that is what the JBoss home refers to. Okay, and then the server name is specifically in an organization. If you install or set up a server, you will be giving a particular name or the group name. So here again, we are not interested. So I'm just giving it as the default. And then what you have to give is what is the file that you want to deploy. So when you connect to the application server through this plugin, what is that file that is the jar or var which you have to deploy. So in our case, I'm interested to deploy this file itself. So I'll give the GAV of this particular project. So when I use the GAV of this, what does it mean? Whatever the file that we are creating, that is component2 -1.0 snapshot.jar is what will get connected to this application server and it will get deployed. So we will give the GAV of that particular file. Okay. Okay. So here we are just saying what is the GAV and what exactly it has to do. But again, if you see, we are not giving the phase of any Maven's lifecycle attached to it, which means in order to invoke this, we can call this independently. But to call this independently, we need to know what is the default goal associated, right? So for that, once again, if you go back to the home page, you can see there are lots of goals associated with this particular plugin. And out of this, we need to pick what exactly we are trying to do. So in our case, we are trying to deploy a file from our project. That is what our interest is. Okay, so in that case, we will use this goal, which helps us to connect to the particular application server that we have here through this plugin. And in that, whatever instructions that we have given, that is to take this GAV or take this file and deploy it here. Okay, so that is what we are basically trying to do. Okay, so now to call this, we need to call this particular goal to Maven. So let's go back to our project, and in that specifically I'm trying to deploy only component 2, right? So let's go to component 2, and in this I'll say Maven and this goal name, so that now it will call directly the plugin. Okay, so if you see, this is the plugin that we had asked it to run, but why is it coming from the beginning? Internally, if you see, this deploy goal depends on the deploy goal of the Maven's lifecycle phase, because this is a deploy goal associated with this plugin, but there is a deploy plugin which is also available in the Maven's lifecycle, right? So what it is going to do is, now it is going to call the Maven's deploy lifecycle phase, and in that, rather than calling whatever the default plugin which Maven will use, that it will overwrite with our specific plugin what we have to do. So that is the reason when you say deploy, that was the last phase, right? So it is going from the beginning of first generating the resources, compiling the file, testing the file, and after testing, it will create our default package. And after creating the package, it is going to the deploy phase, wherein when you go to the deploy phase, rather than calling the default plugin, it is calling the specific plugin that we have given. Okay, that is why here you see once again it is coming from the default lifecycle phase of deploy, wherein you have invoked the Maven's deploy phase, but the difference is rather than calling the default plugin whatever it knows, we have specifically attached this plugin and we are saying that please invoke this plugin. Okay, so now as part of that, it has created the package that is this one, and it has basically connected to this application server that you can see here, and it would have deployed. So how do we know? You can go back to this particular application server, and in the manage deployments, you can see that this file has been deployed to this application server. Okay, so if you want, now here I gave deploy, right? Let me change it. So rather than deploy, if I say undeploy, because there are a lot of goals. Now let's try that also. Let's say undeploy. Undeploy means it should remove whatever it has deployed. So like this, for the same plugin, we can give different goals. Okay, but again, since this has been attached to the deployment phase, it goes through everything and then finally calls the plugin and tries to undeploy. And here you see, if you refresh, you'll not be able to see this. So this is how specific to a plugin you can call a goal, and in our case what we are invoking is a deploy goal. And since we already have a goal called deploy in our Maven's lifecycle phase, it is going to call that, but at the end, when exactly it has to execute the deploy phase, it will use the specific JBoss plugin. The same thing if you had given the Apache's goal for deploy, after doing everything, it will call the plugin specific to Apache what you have written. Okay, so like that, particular to the deployment, there should be a plugin through which we will be connecting to that application server or web server, and we deploy whatever is the package we have to do. Getting it? So now, if you go to an organization, the first thing that we need to find out is where is the deployment that we are trying to do, and corresponding to that, what is the plugin that we have to use. So if in the company they are using Apache, then you have to use Apache's plugin, or if they say JBoss, then you have to use JBoss. And if there's anything other than that, then you have to find out what is the tool they are using, and based on that, what plugin that we have to use, and then give it here. So from Maven, it's all about plugin, but it's from our process where you have to invoke, we will be invoking it either directly or attach it to a phase of the Maven's lifecycle. Getting it?
In JBoss, we can able to create a private space so that others cannot able to view our deployment kind of things.
What do you mean by private space? I didn't get it.
I meant to say, like, if we do any deployment to JBoss and all, like others should not view what I have deployed, because for every company, like, there will be some security protocols will be there. So I'm thinking that way.
Yeah, we can do that. See, that is more from the application server that you're trying to do. Yeah, we can do it.
Okay.
Because again, I'm not going into the administration of JBoss as such, because you won't be doing it. The only thing that you would be required to do is, if there is an application server, and since you are going to use it as part of your build, what you have to do is basically, if you have the knowledge on how do you connect it, how do you start and stop, that should be good enough. Because again, this will be taken care by the IT. But if you have the knowledge of administration, then we can go ahead and do all those things, because pretty much on the other side, even you will have load balancing and routing on the application server also. So if we are familiar with the administration, we can go ahead and take it. Or again, the IT team or the engineering support team will be taking care of the core administration of all this. Okay, so now coming to the last part. So far, whatever changes that we were doing to the pom.xml, adding plugin, putting up different kind of modules. So everything was for the development, right? So when do you keep doing a build? Until the developers submit a change. So when a developer submits a change, we will be getting a new request to integrate or merge, and that is when you have to do a build. So if a developer is not writing new code, then we won't be pretty much required to do a build, right? So a build is required basically to test and to give it to the customer based on a new change that the developer has done. So at some point of time, when you do the testing and freeze every work, that means we are ready to move to the release wherein we can give whatever that we have built as a product ship to the customer. So when you come to that particular point, now how is that you're going to release? So to do the release, basically the first thing that we will have to decide is what is the version number that we are using for the release. So now there will be a version number which the management will decide. And the version number, as we know, basically it's a combination of three digits, that is major number dot minor number dot the patch number or the build number. So once you get this version number, now when you are trying to do the build once again in the Maven, the difference what we are going to have is now so far in all our projects, we have been using the standard version, which is 1.0 snapshot, right? Which typically indicates that the project that we are trying to work on is a development project, which means it's not yet been moved to the release stage. Okay, now among all of them, everything refers to the 1.0 snapshot. So now, how do you change this to a particular version? So now when you know what is a particular version that you want to release, then there are two ways that you can do. So manually, what I can do is I can go to the project, and in the project, I can edit all the pom.xml wherever you have and keep changing it. So this way of doing it manually could be sometime cumbersome task because you need to know all the pom.xml that is available. And once again, in the pom.xml, you have to change all the reference. So if you come here, you have to change this. Here, you need to change this. You need to change this. And again, you have a dependency. You have to change this. And then you come here and you change this and change this. So like that, it'll be a little tedious process to keep changing it, right? And again, if someone doesn't know how to modify this form.xml, then again, it's going to be a problem. So that is when in Maven, we have a built-in plugin through which we can change all the versions, or we can set the versions based on our need. Okay, so that default goal that we use for doing the changes is versions:set. Okay, there are many default plugins available. One of the most popular or widely used is version set. So when we use this version set and we give a value, it'll be pretty much updating in all the project files based on your current project, and it'll update it with the given version. Okay, so to give the version, now you will have to use a value called new version. Okay, so new version is a variable which actually going to store whatever the value that you gives. Okay, and what does this -d mean? So it is something on how do you pass a value to Maven. So here, any argument that you want to pass, even whether it could be an ant or Maven, if you want to pass any argument to Maven, with some specific value, then you have to always give it -d. So -d represents that you are passing a parameter. And for that parameter, what is the name of the parameter equal to what is the value of the parameter? Okay, so if you call Maven version set -d and new version equal to whatever version number, then Maven will set everything. I mean, it will set the project with this particular value. Okay, so now what we'll do is, now once again, to run as a project, we know that we have the parent pom.xml. So I don't have to go inside each and every module and run this, because from the parent, if I run anything here, it will internally pass it on to everything, right? That is the multi-module concept that we learned last class. So now if I give here, and let's say I'll give some release version number. Okay, so what will happen? This will get called once again based on the order, and it will go to all the components in the modules and it will try to change. So if you go, now you can see that it has taken a backup of the existing file. See? And if you go to each of the file, it would have got modified. So everywhere it would have got modified as the specific version. Here, 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 it would have modified. And now, once we have modified, we'll go ahead with the build. Okay. And once again, why is that I'm doing an install? Because now when you do a build, the component 2 has to be rebuilt first. And when you do a build of component 2, that has to be available in the local repository. Only then what will happen? The component 1 will pick up the component 2-2.3.jar in the local repository. That is why we are doing the Maven install. Okay. So once again, it goes from the order of first trying to build the component 2 and then goes to component 1, wherein it is saying now, if you see specifically, it talks about the version 2.3.1. Okay, and in fact, if you see the output file, it would have created a jar file specific to 2.3.1. Okay, so now this is the name. Earlier we had 1.snapshot, that is 1.0 snapshot. Instead of that, it creates this, and then it installs the package, and with respect to that, it once again builds the component 1, and for that it is again creating component 1.2.3.jar. Okay, and if you go to the folder, you can see every module has a target, and in the target now you can see specifically the release file. In the same way, if you go to component 2, you can see that. So this is what we will be shipping it to our customer. Okay, so now once we have done the build, we will take the particular deliverable or the artifact and we will be giving it to the customer, or we generally call it as shipping to the customer. So once we have given the jar files or the deliverable, whatever that we are getting, what is the next task that we have to do? So now, are we going to continue with the development, or the project is final, you're not going to do any more development? But typically you will have to do some more development, or people will still continue working, right? So what will happen? The developer will start doing some changes on top of this, and it keeps going on as the life cycle. But now when we have to do the test again, I cannot take this 2.3.1 because 2.3.1 is only when you have to release. So anytime you are back to the development, what is that we need to do? We have to once again get back to the older snapshot version that defines that we are working on a development copy, right? So there are two things that we can do with the changes what we have done. So either you do a commit. Commit means typically when I said this workspace, whatever that you are having itself will be available in the Git, which means that in the Git, you will be storing everything together. This component one, component two, pom.xml, that itself will be available in the Git repository. So that is when you do a Git clone for the first time, you will get all this workspace. So in that case, when you have modified the pom.xml here, then it would be changed there. So you can go ahead and submit or store the changes permanently in case if you're not doing any release. So if you want to do that, then you can do a versions commit so that we can permanently do the change. In case if we want to continue with our development copy, then what we need to do is basically we need to undo this change or the revert of the changes what we have done, right? So that is when we will use a goal called revert using the same plugin versions. So when you say Maven versions revert, what it is going to do is from the backup, whatever it has taken, right? It is going to replace this fail. So that is the purpose of taking a backup. Now, if you see, this is just a copy of the older file which had the snapshot as the version. So now basically when you say revert, it is going to replace this file from the content of the backup file so that everything will get changed back to the version 1.0 snapshot and we can continue doing the development build. Okay, so let's try running this. Once again, I am running it from my parent folder of the project so that it goes through all the component by itself and changes. Now you can see that the backup file would have completely removed for all the project. And now if you go back to the file and see that it would have changed everything back to 1.0 snapshot. Okay, and now because of this, if we do a build, what will happen? It will try to create only the specific snapshot file. That means now if you go to this, you will see only the snapshot files being created, which represents that we are working on a development copy.
I have a question here, Adam.
Yes.
Like if we are having two backup files at the time, like which is going to take that one?
Hmm. Yes.
My question is, like if we are having two backup files, I mean to say like two backup versions,
Hmm.
like out of that one, which is going to take, like if we revert those things?
So it's again, instead of we manually reverting it, and the first time when we had the file, when we did the modifications by calling the version set, what it would have done is it would have just taken the copy of the file and wherever you see the version tag, it would have replaced with the new version. So that is what the versions revert is going to do. Revert means it is going to delete the file and replace the backup as the original file. That is what ideally it is going to do. Getting it? It's just a backup.
Okay, Damodar.
So rather than we doing it, when you use the version set, it is going to take a copy of this, and in the new file, it is going to modify. And since when you say revert, all it has to do is delete the existing file and rename the older backup as the new pom.xml so that you will get back the same content whatever you had earlier. Okay. Okay. So now once the release has been done, okay, so what else tasks that we have? So the only pending thing that if you see, we have gone through all the phases of the Maven's lifecycle, but along with clean, there was one more called site. If you have noted, I said this is used for reporting or documentation. So that is when the other type of plugin, because once again, if you remember in the build type plugin, I said you have one type is build, the other one is reporting plugin, right? So these are those plugins using which we will be generating the report or documentation. And in the same way, site is a reporting type plugin using which we will be able to get the documentation of the project. So when I say documentation, it is majorly for the development or to the program management to understand the structure of the project, how it is defined, and what and all are the dependencies, what exactly it requires to build this project. Okay, so rather than we writing it, since it's a Java based project, Maven will help us to set up all those details specifically about each and every component that we have in the project. So if you run Maven site, pretty much whenever it is needed for the management or for the audit purpose, it will go through the pom.xml, and in that it will try to get all the details specifically. Okay, so now let's try to run the Maven site and see. So you can see that now with respect to this, it is going to call all new plugins internally and it is going to run. And in your case, when you're running it for the first time, when the plugins are not available, it will download from the central repository to the local repository, and then it will be using them to generate the report. Okay, so you can see what and all is doing. So basically it is trying to take the details of the project and what and all are the dependencies of that, and from that dependencies, once again it does a convergence means, is it available? Because if you say the dependency, is that dependency dependent on something else and you have that, so that convergence details everything for that each dependencies, it will be gathering it. Okay, and for that each dependency it will be collecting the information. So that is how Maven is also called as a dependency management tool. So automatically it will take care of fetching up the information, and then it also takes care of the plugin whatever that you have. For each plugin it is going to get the report, and based on all these things together it's going to give us a summary. So how does this look? So if you go back to your project, okay, now you can see that you would have got a folder called site. In fact, now, until now, in our parent project, we never had the target because we never had a source for this demo fab, right? Everything was inside the component, but now it has created one folder called target, and inside that there is a folder called site, and this is what acts as the place where it would have dumped all the documentation to this. So if you go to the index, pretty much you can see each and every details that we have here. Okay, in the same way, if you go to each component, okay, in every component it would have created a site folder under target, and if you pick this, pretty much you can see that it has the details about the project and what and all are the dependencies. So here you can see for the component 1, it is depending on the component 2 at this compiling phase. So at the compile phase, it needs this component 2 jar. And for that, what is the GAV? It gives this here. And then for running the test, what is the dependency that it needs? Okay, basically here it gives the graph or the dependency tree and whatever other details that specifically this project requires that will be used by the Maven. And where exactly is the central repository that it is picking it up in case you do not have a file available in the local repository. Okay, so like this, for each module or each component and the complete project as such, it'll be having the documentation put inside this. So now if you want, you can create a zip out of this and store it to the Git itself directly, or you can cut it out separately and put it in a different location, like you might have a particular documentation site or a wiki page, or pretty much any other place where the company tries to store some documentation, you can store it up. So now, rather than you sharing all the information about the source code for the project, if you just give this, they can go through that and they can get the details about the project.
So Adam, Sanjay here.
Yes.
So the documentation part would be helpful for whom? The other DevOps people, or like is it someone else?
We are the DevOps people. It is majorly for development and for the program management team.
Okay.
Whoever is interested to know the structure of the project, they would be using it. So basically, developers are the ones who need it, or the managers or the program managers team, whoever is taking care of the project or handling the project, they would like to know all these details, then they can go through this. Getting it? Okay. So that's majorly what you will be doing on a day-to-day activity in Maven. Okay, but along with that, there is one more thing that you need to know. But again, since it's outside the scope of what we're going to do, I'm just going to talk about that so that in case if it is needed, you should be aware that yeah, we can do such a thing. So that is what is more important to understand. If not, you'll not be doing this on a regular basis. So far, if you have seen, I said every project should have a pom.xml because this is the configuration file which is specific to a project, right? So what it means? It means that it is a file specific to each project. So now, by saying that, every project should have at least one pom.xml which is going to define the details about that project. Now, what does it mean? So this means this file is local to this particular project, and this file is local to specific to this project. This pom.xml is local to this specific project. So like this, anything that you put inside this pom.xml is known only to this project, right? So if I add a plugin here, only this component knows, or this project knows, right? In the same way, if I modify this pom.xml or give any details, only this particular component knows. Now, in the same way, there could be certain scenarios where you do not want to give something specific to each project, or You want something wherein every project should be using. Then how can you do that? So what are the necessities that you will be doing? One of the examples that if you see now, if you go to this component 2, we had used this plugin. Okay. Now let's say this is the application server which will be used for different projects in your organization. Okay. Now, if let's say there is a username and password which has to be given for this. Okay. And how will you give a username and password? So additionally, in the configuration, you might have one tag called user and password through which you will be passing it. But now, if you try to put that content into this pom.xml, actually this will also get checked into the Git repository. And if a developer or a QA engineer is also trying to open this file, they can see the username and password, right? Because the deployment will be done usually by the build engineers or the DevOps engineers who will take care of the build process. But now, if you hardcore the username and password here, then it will be visible to everyone. So in that scenario, you might want to give the username and password in some other place wherein it will be global to all the people who are using this particular plugin. So that is when, if there is a scenario where you don't want to give some value specific to a project, that means if you give anything in the pom.xml, then it will be local and specific to that module or the project. But if you want to do something globally so that all the projects will use it, then there is one more file called as settings.xml. So where is that settings.xml? So if you go to your Maven home or M2 home, what is M2 home? So M2 home is the place where we have installed or extracted the Maven's source or the content, right? So inside that, if you go to the configuration folder, you will find one more file called settings.xml. Okay, so what is this file? So this is the file which Maven is going to use it. So whenever Maven runs something, okay, so it will be running it in the two order. First, it will check for the settings.xml, and any data that you have given in the settings.xml will be taken, and then it will come to the local pom.xml. Okay, because so far what is that I said? If you run Maven in the current directory, if there is a pom.xml, it will read. But before doing it, it will always try to take this settings.xml file and it will try to read the content, and along with this it will read the content of the local pom.xml. So in that case, this settings.xml acts as a global configuration file, whereas the pom.xml acts as a local configuration file. So anything that you put in the settings.xml will be read by all the projects in this machine or whichever is using this installation of Maven. Okay, so that is how anything that you give in the settings.xml will be global to all the projects. So what and all you can give? Pretty much you can give all the information related to what plugin, the concepts like username and password, or if there are any default values which you want to overwrite, you can use this. Okay, so the first thing is, if you want, you can set the local repository to some other place. In some cases, what will happen is, now you don't want to put Maven in only one machine. Let's say that if for the development you have multiple machines, and for each of the machine, if you install Maven, there will be a specific home directory for each user, right? So how is it going to happen? When you go as an organization, you don't just have separate installation of Maven for every people. So instead of that, you can install Maven in one location which would be accessible by everyone in the Unix or Linux machine. And for that, there should be a common local repository, isn't it? If I run, I shouldn't be going to my home directory to access file. And if you run, you shouldn't be going to your home directory, because both of us, when we run Maven, it should be pointing to the same local repository. So that is when they can try to modify these here. And pretty much if you see here in this settings.xml, you can give those values. So here, if you edit this local repository and change this to whatever directory that you want, then by default, any project which is using this installation of Maven or this M2 home when they are using, then they will be using this particular local repository. So like this, you can change the default values of Maven so that if you put it up here, all those will be acting as a global value. And by default, the data in the settings.xml, everything will be commented. So unless and until you don't use it, it will be commented. Suppose if you want to change this value, then in the XML, if you want to comment something, it will be basically using exclamatory double hyphen and you end it up with double hyphen. So if I remove this, you can see the color will get changed. Okay, so what you have to do now is, in case if you're interested to uncomment, just remove this and you come here and change the value. So if I change this to some other value, no matter what project you are running in this machine using this M2 home, it will always use this particular path as the local repository. Okay, and not only that, there are a couple of other options that you can use. Let's say that there is a plugin where every project has to use. So rather than now you manually adding it in each pom.xml of each project, what we can do is we can basically create a group and you can give all your GAV of that plugin here. So that now, regardless of whether you have given in your local pom.xml, if you call a plugin, automatically it will be referring from the settings.xml also. So that is how the data that you give in settings.xml is a global one. And if you want specific only to a particular project, then you can give it in your pom.xml. And not only that, you can give details about username and password and also some server, right? Now, when I say server, what you have to do is, all you have to do is within the server tag, you can create a tag called ID and you give a name. And for this name, whatever tag that you want, you can give. Now, anywhere in your pom.xml, if you just refer to this name, what it will do is it will replace this with whatever values that you have given here. For instance, let's say for this plugin, I need a username and password. Okay. Now, instead of giving this here, in this particular place inside the configuration, if I just say ID, okay, and if I give this particular value, then what it is going to do is it is going to replace whatever that you give here as an ID with this username and password that you have stored. So that now, if you look, anyone who is trying to use this pom.xml will not know the username and password, whereas that will be taken from the settings.xml. Okay, so that is how you can make sure that any particular value that you want to add, you can put it up in this particular settings.xml. So you can give values of plugin, you can change the repository path, if there is any server that you want to connect, or if there is any site which you need to connect for certain data that you have to take, everything can be specified here. Wherein if you specify anything here, it will be considered as a global value. In fact, you can set your profiles also in this. So based on this, it will be calling up all the specification. So you can give profiles, you can give plugin, you can give the local repository or the global repository, all the values that you can set as a global value. So remember, only if you need it, you will be doing it in the settings.xml, whereas all the values that you set in this file will be treated as a global value. which means any project whichever is using this M2 home, then it will be using all this. But if you want specifically only for a particular project, then what is that you have to do? You have to go to the pom.xml of that project and keep the changes there. Okay, so that's the difference between settings.xml and pom.xml. In short, pom.xml is a local scoped file, which means if you do modification, then only that project will know. And settings.xml is a global file, which means if you modify something into it, then it will be reflected in all the projects, whichever is going to use that Maven home. Okay, so remember this, maybe for interview purpose or sometimes if it is needed, you would do. But unless and until you don't need a requirement, you will not be changing the settings.xml. Okay, so make sure that you go through the file and understand, but don't change anything, because if you uncomment or something, then Maven will be behaving in a default different way. Okay, so that is one. And other than that, sometimes there might be a weird requirement where, let's say, one developer or the development team, they come up and say that I already have a project. Okay, and then I want to move to Maven, for instance. It is not that there is a new project they are working. They are already working on some project and they have the different structure, a different tool. And now they are saying, I want to move to Maven. So in that case, now to move to Maven, what is that we need? We need two things. One is the directory structure and the pom.xml. So pretty much pom.xml we will put, but they will say that I cannot change the directory structure. Maybe they have a different directory structure. Then how will things work? So that is when everything in Maven, whatever values that you want to pass, will be treated as a property. Okay, so you can see here now there was a default tag called properties, and inside this there was one property tag. Okay, it says that the source writing style, whatever that we are using in the XML is UTF, whatever, that is not of much interest for us. But now the question that we have is, in case if we need something to be specifically modified wherein I have my directory structure in a different way, then how is that you're going to work with it? Okay, so that is when we have different properties that is available in Maven. And how you're going to define the properties is, there is a particular name of the properties for each task. So let's say if you have the files or the Java files or the source files put up in a different directory structure other than the src main or src test. If you're not following that structure, then we can still specify all those things using these properties. So there are particular name of properties for each value that it needs. For example, what is the folder that you have the source? So that will be specified using source directory. Okay, wherein the base dir or the base directory specifies what is the project directory. That is what we call it as base dir. And then the source dir or the source directory specifies where exactly is the Java files available. In our case, it will be available in the inside base dir src main Java. Suppose if you don't have the structure, then you have to define this property inside your pom.xml and say this. In the same way, where is the scripts or any template or anything that you have inside the src main, you have to give this. And where is the test directory? You have to say the test source directory, where exactly it is, because our default directory is src test java. In the same way, where is the output that you want to put? And for that, there is one property. And where is the output for your test? Like this, every value has a property through which you can modify it. But it is not advisable to do, because Now, if you think again, instead of giving all these values, it was so simple for us if we just maintain the directory structure, right? So if you maintain the directory structure, then Maven goes with the default behavior of reading everything. That is, where is the source, where is the test file, where output should be going, which plugin should be having, everything is possible. But if needed, we can modify. But if you are modifying, you have to make sure that you are changing all these values and you are giving all these values, because even if you miss one of the value, then Maven will not work. So that is why we will always have to make sure the advantage of going through the standards of Maven, whichever it is giving us, so that our life will be simplified in not taking care of the maintenance, because the only task that we'll be doing is whenever there is a need, you'll just add some plugins and do some changes in the pom.xml based on that, but not on the other way. And also, if you see, it is quite easy for us to replicate one project into other project, right? It's all about copy pasting. So if you copy paste and change the values in the pom.xml, or go to the directory structure inside src main and delete the files and put the new files, it's as simple as that. You can easily reuse it. Whereas if you keep doing this way, then you have to change so many values that you will be having in it. So that is one of the advantage why Maven acts as a project management tool. If you follow the standard directory structure, go through the Maven's lifecycle phases, and use the pom.xml through defining it all the values. Getting it?